Developing right now on Morning News Now, retaliation fueling fears of escalation. Israel now assessing the damage from its promised counterstrike in Iran just days after Iran's first ever direct assault on Israel. We have team coverage. Also this morning, a milestone moment in Donald Trump's historic New York hush money trial. 12 jurors and an alternate now sworn in as the former president lashes out about the case.
I'm supposed to be in a lot of different places campaigning, but I've been here all day on a trial that really is a very unfair trial.
What we know about who's in the jury box, including why two previously picked jurors were dismissed. Plus, something to sneeze at this spring, shaping up to be a tough one for allergy sufferers. We'll get to the root of it. And surprise, Swifties, I hope you're ready for it, because Taylor Swift is back with not just one, but two new albums. We're going to tell you about the highly anticipated midnight release of the Tortured Poets Department and a surprise second drop just hours later. Perhaps you haven't even slept. You've just been listening all morning long to all that new music. Good to have you with us on this Friday. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off this morning. We begin this morning with that Israeli attack on Iran, a move that is threatening to further escalate tensions between the regional foes. A source has told NBC News that Israel carried out a limited strike inside Iran. Explosions were reported in the skies of two Iranian cities, including Isfahan, which is home to a nuclear facility. Now, this video, verified by NBC News, appears to show a strike over that city. But this morning, Iran is downplaying the incident, saying that its air defenses shot down 3 drones and that the area was safe. The Israeli attack comes almost a week after Iran launched a barrage of missiles and drones toward Israel, which were mostly intercepted. That attack was in retaliation to an Israeli strike on Iran's consulate in Syria earlier this month, which killed top Iranian military commanders. We've got a team standing by to talk more about this and what it means for the broader region. We're going to start things off with NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez, who's in Tel Aviv. So, Raf, walk us through what we know about this Israeli attack, and do we know what it was targeting inside Iran? Are the Israelis saying anything about it?
Joe, the Israelis are saying nothing on the record. They are neither confirming nor denying that they were responsible for this attack inside Iran. And that seems to be very much by design. They're not crowing, they're not gloating, they're not rubbing the Iranians' faces in this. And the hope seems to be that if they don't escalate from a war of words perspective, the Iranians may feel that they are not under pressure to retaliate militarily. Now, here's what we do know. A source familiar with the situation says Israel carried out a limited strike inside of Iran. They've spent the last couple of hours assessing the damage, the effectiveness of it. We don't know at this point whether the strike was carried out by aircraft, missiles, drones. We do know that the U.S. received at least some heads up that American forces had time to get their own air defenses on high alert in the event that Iranian troops targeted U.S. forces across the region. There's no indication at this point. The U.S. also did not take part in the strike. That's according to U.S. officials. They are eager to stress that at this point. Here inside of Israel, there has been no new restrictions for the Israeli civilian population. And, Joe, that appears to be an indication that at least right now, the Israelis are not bracing for major Iranian retaliation.
And Iran appears to be downplaying this attack. What are we hearing from Iran and from its state media? Any signs Iran could retaliate?
It's really striking, Joe. They are really downplaying what happened in the early hours this morning. The Iranian president spoke a little while earlier, and he made no mention of this attack whatsoever. Now, as far as we can tell, the main target appears to have been a military base near the city of Isfahan. That's a couple of hours south of Tehran. People there woken up around 4 in the morning by explosions in the sky above. But Iranian state television has been stressing all morning that the explosions were caused by Iranian air defenses going off. They are stressing that life inside of Isfahan is normal. We have actually been seeing, in some cases, Iranian state media almost making fun of what happens, releasing memes showing a kind of almost laughably small hole in the dirt saying this was the attack. But crucially, Joe, at this point, Iran is not vowing retaliation, and they do not officially, at least, appear to be even pointing the finger of blame at Israel. Joe.
All right, Raf Sanchez in Tel Aviv. Raf, thank you so much. Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Ali Rafa. Ali, good morning. So a source tells NBC News Israeli officials informed the U.S. of its intention to carry out a response to last weekend's attack on Israel. Any response from the White House reacting to these new developments?
Yeah, Joe, good morning. Well, we're still awaiting official White House reaction. It seems like the first reaction we're going to get from the Biden administration could come from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is in Italy right now, actually, for the last few days, meeting with G7 leaders to, among other things, contain the fallout from the Israel-Hamas war, and especially the developments over the last week. And as we wait for that reaction, we do know, as you heard Raf mention, that the U.S. was notified beforehand of this attack by Israel that the U.S. did not take part in. We know that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin shared a phone call with his Israeli counterpart yesterday, and U.S. officials also met with Israeli officials virtually to talk about the situation in Rafah. It's not clear whether this was discussed on either or both of those calls, potentially neither of them, but we do know that the U.S. was informed beforehand. And if you remember the backdrop of this action by Israel, the backdrop that this comes against, with the president telling Prime Minister Netanyahu on a call last weekend, essentially to take the win when those missiles that were launched by Iran were intercepted coming into Israel, saying that that demonstrated Israel's ability to defend itself. The president on that call urging Netanyahu not to take any retaliatory steps towards Iran, and clearly saying to Netanyahu that if he did, that the U.S. would not be involved in any of those offensive measures. The president consistently trying to use diplomacy to de-escalate and urge restraint to the Israelis, really over the last 6 months now since the Israel-Hamas war began, but especially over the last few days. And ever since then, we have seen U.S. officials repeatedly come out and stress that they are not seeking a wider war. They are not seeking a direct war with Iran. So the president, U.S. officials certainly knew this was a realistic possibility this would happen, but still stressing the need to issue restraint and practice that by the Israelis, Joe.
So, Ali, the U.S., of course, not involved in this strike, but just hours earlier, the Biden administration did impose new sanctions that targeted Iran's missile and drone program. What should we know about that?
Yeah, this was an action taken not just by the U.S., but also the U.K. and EU. And it came after coordination between the U.S. and G7 allies in the aftermath of those strikes by Iran last weekend. These are aimed specifically at Iran's missile and drone program. They came in response to those strikes. And it is going to be used to essentially wean off Iran's ability to supply its weapons program, not just for Iran, but also its proxy groups like Hezbollah, which helped Iran start those missile attacks last weekend. And we saw in a statement by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, she said in part, quote, "We will continue to deploy our sanctions authority to counter Iran with further actions in the days and weeks ahead." Of course, all of this following into that approach I mentioned by President Biden to use diplomacy instead of military action to squeeze Tehran of these resources, Joe.
All right, Ali Rafa at the White House. Ali, thank you so much. Let's get more reaction now from Hagar Shamali. She is the host of Oh My World on YouTube and a former NSC director for Syria and Lebanon. Hagar, good to have you with us. What do you make of this attack by Israel? I mean, early signs suggest it was limited. So what kind of message is the Israelis attempting to send here?
That's right. It was relatively restrained. And honestly, I expected Israel to respond. I expected the response to be restrained. And this was, as far as we know. The Iranian response is what I find the most fascinating. And Raf really hit on this as the fact that Usually, by the way, when the Iranian regime is struck or when there's something like this, they speak publicly with a lot of drama, with a lot of bombastic remarks. And keep in mind that it is not 7 a.m. their time. It's already well into the afternoon. They've had time to respond, and they are trying to downplay this. And I think that's because they're trying to give themselves wiggle room to mosey on out. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that the cycle of the general broader war between Israel and Iran, between Israel and Iran's proxies, doesn't continue. It will continue. But that means that I don't expect what happened last night to turn into something, to a wide-scale, full regional war. The thing that I would try to remember is that Israel is trying to send a message of deterrence without escalating further, and Iran is trying to test red lines.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. An Iranian official was quoted as saying there were no plans for an immediate retaliation. How are you interpreting Iran's response? Could this potentially be the off-ramp both sides might have been looking for?
An off-ramp is a good way to look at it, because Iran, if you remember, after the Iranian assault on Israel and Israel's vow to respond, Iran said that they would have their hands on the trigger and that, quote, they would respond within seconds. Well, it's been hours, so I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. And I think what you see them saying to the public is that they've intercepted everything in the sky, that there was this attempt and that it failed, and there you go. And so I think they are trying to build themselves this off-ramp if needed, because they are aware that while they are testing red lines, they don't want to goad the United States specifically into a war. And the U.S. is also communicating the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk more about the U.S. Before this happened, the U.S. and others made it clear they didn't want Israel to attack Iran and risk escalating the situation further. I mean, so with what we're seeing this morning, do you think the Biden administration will be angry or annoyed with how this went down, or maybe even a little bit relieved?
Yeah, I don't think they'll be angry or annoyed, because I think that having worked with the Israeli government very closely when I was at the White House, they are used to the Israeli government at the end of the day making decisions on its own, even if it is influenced. And they are influenced by the U.S. perspective. They do care about it. But the White House is going to expect Israel to do its own thing. And to be honest with you, there was an argument for both sides. The U.S. is trying to say, take the win and don't escalate this further. And Israel is trying to say, Iran pursued this unprecedented attack and we have to send a message of deterrence, but we will do it so that it doesn't escalate things too much. So there was an argument both ways, and I think the White House is going to say, all right, now let's try and calm things down, and they'll try and send messages to Iran indirectly through other partners.
All right, Hagar Shamali, we always appreciate your expertise on a busy morning like this. Thank you so much. This morning marks a moment in American history. A jury has now been sworn in for the first criminal trial of a former U.S. president. 12 jurors have now been selected to hear the Trump hush money case, but not before the process appeared to suffer a setback. That's because 2 previously selected jurors were dismissed from the case. One juror had second thoughts about her ability to remain impartial in the case. The other was dismissed over an apparent failure to disclose previous interactions with law enforcement. This Manhattan jury will now decide whether the former president illegally falsified business records as part of a scheme to conceal alleged hush money payments to an adult film star. Trump is alleged to have had an affair with her. Trump denies those allegations. For more, we're joined on set by NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns and NBC News Now legal analyst Angela Senadella. Good to have you both with us. So we have this jury now, 12 jurors. It's a milestone in the case. It only took 3 days. We thought it could take up to 12 weeks. What should we know here?
Yeah, we were expecting 1 to 2 weeks. We're on the shorter end of that timeline. And this is in part because the judge did really want to move things along. Earlier in the week, there were some frustrations from Judge Merchan on too much minutia, too many motions that the lawyers were trying to discuss. He said, look, let's get this jury process finished up. He moved the gag order hearing that the prosecutors were asking for. He set that for next Tuesday, so that he could get through this jury selection process. What we have so far, 7 men and 5 women will be on this jury. We've got a couple of attorneys, a salesman, a teacher, a software engineer, speech therapist, physical therapist, a retired wealth manager, a range of ages, Joe, and one of the alternates has been selected.
And there'll be more alternates selected.
There will be more
correct?
alternates selected today. That's slated for later today.
So we had this situation, Angela, where 2 jurors who had been picked had been dismissed. How unusual unusual was that? What should we know about that?
So it's not unusual generally for jurors to be dismissed. They're like you, me, they're busy, they have lives, they're real people, commitments. But it is unusual it happened so fast, even before the trial is starting. But given that one of them went to the judge and said she had questions about her own impartiality, it's somewhat honorable that it's happening so early. You prefer it to happen earlier rather than later so that you don't get down to your last alternate and wonder if the whole trial has to start again.
So let's talk about what we think is going to happen today, which is the judge is going to decide how much of Trump's past can be a part of this trial. How does the judge go about making that decision? How important is it in the scope of everything the jury has to consider?
So it's extremely important, given that the questions here surround whether or not Trump will take the stand, and if he does, what sorts of questions can be asked on cross-examination. So Trump is unusual in that he has this legal record of lying. Most of us don't have that. But given the E. Jean Carroll, where this defamation verdict was turned against him, it's shown he was lying there. Similarly, in the other case with the civil fraud, he went on the stand and the judge said, you are lying. So being uncredible is what the prosecution wants to bring in cross-examination to really break down his credibility. And so can that be introduced? That's a question the judge will have to decide. And it is an art. It's not a science there. It's the probative value versus the prejudicial value. So we'll see what he decides.
And then from there, what's the timeline? What are we looking at as far as it's moving along at a good pace so far, but this is just the first few days.
Moving along at a good pace. So Judge Rashan has called 96 additional potential alternate jurors today. So we need 12 jurors, 6 alternates. So that means we need 5 more alternates selected today. He expects that will happen, which means, Joe, that the first opening statements in a criminal trial against a former president could begin as soon as Monday.
Which is just surprising that we're moving at this rate right now.
That's right.
And then this is a trial that we still think is expected to last about 6 weeks once it gets going, or could it even be faster than that?
About 6 weeks is what we're expecting, but as we've already seen, things can take some steps back and some quick steps forward, so we'll have to see how it goes.
Angela, what will you be watching out for when we get into these opening and closing statements?
So I will be really looking for this question of intent. I think that's really the hardest thing the prosecutors have to prove here. So we know there are documents. We know there are physical records that prove that he likely did falsify the business records. But in order for it to be a felony, they also have to prove it was intended to conceal another crime, and that here is interfering in the election. So that is what the prosecution's going to have to prove, and that's what the defense is going to say. No, we were just looking to protect him from Melania or protect Melania or their children. So there's a lot to be argued here about intent. All
right, we'll see what happens. Dasha Burns, Angela Senadella, appreciate you both. Thank you so much. Now to Capitol Hill, where the House of Representatives is nearing a possible vote this weekend on foreign aid packages to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. This comes as embattled House Speaker Mike Johnson continues to face criticism from fellow House Republicans who are opposed to the aid and are threatening his job. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us with the latest on this. Ali, good morning. So where do things stand with House Republicans when it comes to these foreign aid packages that we've been talking about for months now? What are the remaining hurdles to try and get them passed?
Well, look, among Republicans, the situation remains messy, but it was that anyway. Now what we expect to see after a very late night at the Rules Committee, we watched in a very rare moment all Democrats join Republicans to pass this rule out of committee, in large part because 3 Republicans who sit on that essential committee said they weren't going to vote for it. This is really rare. Usually the majority party, in this case Republicans, will move along the rule so that it can get to the House floor, whatever the bill in question is. In this case, we knew that 3 hardline conservatives had issues with the way that Johnson was approaching this, and they were vocal about the fact that they were not going to support him or help him in getting it to the House floor. There's another hurdle that we're looking for, though, and it's likely to happen at some point either today or on Saturday, which is the vote on the rule for the full House floor, because the flow of legislation goes House Rules Committee to the floor for a rule vote, and then on to the substance of the actual bill. What we're probably going to see is, again, rare, because rules on the House floor are typically, again, handled by the majority party. Republicans still have issues with this. Democrats are likely to make that vote bipartisan. And then, of course, once you get onto the substance of the bill, We expect that the aid provisions are likely to pass in bipartisan fashion. That doesn't change the fact that Mike Johnson's job is still in trouble, or at least on the line. But it does mean that once we see the rule hit the House floor, this is on a little bit more of a glide path, even though it's happening on a weekend, which is, again, not the norm.
So, and here's another thing that might be an interesting development. Legislation that could ban TikTok, which we've been talking about so much here in the U.S., could be bundled together with foreign aid. We know President Biden says he would sign a ban into law if it gets to his desk. But how does this all play out here?
This is one of those fascinating things where when we talk about this foreign aid bill package, what we're actually talking about are 4 separate bills. The first 3 deal with Israel, Ukraine, and the Indo-Pacific. Those are what we expected. But this 4th bill is sort of a potpourri of different items that Republicans have put together to counter foreign adversaries in various places. Yes, some of them are focused on Iran, but in this instance, their focus is on TikTok, and it's meant to counter the Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party. But the way that they're doing it actually might provide a softer landing on the Senate side, because remember, once the House puts its handprint on this, the Senate has to vote on it before it can go to President Biden's desk. Because of the way that they adopted the language in this TikTok provision, it basically gives TikTok more time to find a new owner that's not a Chinese-owned company. That's something that the head of the Commerce Committee on the Senate side badly wanted. She has received these changes well. I've heard positive things from Democrats and Republicans alike who want to see the TikTok piece of this passed. They cite national security concerns, as they have the entire time that this debate has been going on. But I think the important thing for viewers here who are wondering, oh my God, am I not going to have TikTok? A, we got to wait to see what this thing does and if it passes. But B, what we're really talking about here is a change in ownership. This is not really a cat that you can put back in a bag when so many people are on this platform already. But they're talking about the national security concerns of who runs it and basically how it works behind the scenes.
So surrounding all this, we have to talk about Speaker Johnson and the criticism he's facing from fellow Republicans who want to remove him from the speakership over his support for these foreign aid bills. The Freedom Caucus has actually organized a team to apparently monitor the House floor to ensure rules changes are not implemented that would make it difficult to remove Johnson. Just how real is the threat to Johnson hanging on to the Speaker's gavel?
Well, you touch on 2 different things, right? You've got a House Freedom Caucus who are very skittish right now, especially because 3 of their members are the 3 members on the House Rules Committee that bucked their party, bucked their leadership, and said, absolutely not, I'm not going to help you get this thing to the floor. Again, that is not what you're supposed to do if you are on the Rules Committee, but this is what you get when you put hardline conservatives who have a pretty regular attitude of contempt towards leadership into those critical seats. The concern from the Freedom Caucus is that someone is going to try a procedural sleight of hand, maybe when they're not paying attention, to try to pull 1, 2, or even 3 of those members off of that all-important committee. That's what they're trying to fight against. Now, on the Johnson front, there's a larger battle here, and it involves the entire conference. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene still at the center of this, saying that she has a motion to vacate threat looming over all of this. In order to make that threat real and more urgent, she would have to make it privileged, meaning they have to take it up within 72 or so hours of session days. She's not there yet, but there is still a lot of tension within the conference about if she's going to threaten Johnson's job and when.
See what happens. All right, Ali Vitale, thank you so much. Those April showers that bring May flowers, they are taking their job very seriously this season with a new round of rainy weather heading to parts of the country. Angie Lastman's here with the forecast. Hey, Angie, good morning.
They are getting their job done, Joe, and on a Friday, too. Good morning to you. We've got the rain to talk about this morning. No surprise there. The good news about today, it's going to be different than basically the rest or the previous parts of this week where we were dealing with big areas of the country with the potential for some severe weather. We have a couple of maybe strong storms in our forecast for today, but nothing like what we've been seeing, so that is an improvement. But of course, we're still dealing with that rain here across parts of the Midwest, stretching down into the South, places like Atlanta, Knoxville, Lexington. You woke up to some wet weather. Detroit, you're finally starting to see some improvements with that rain working to the east. But now it's going to start to move into parts of the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and even the Southeast is going to get in on this action with some stronger storms possible as the day goes on. We've got that rain that will be draped across this region here through the rest of your second half of the day. Now, by tomorrow, if if you're looking ahead to your Saturday plans, especially across parts of the South, this kind of stationary front is going to hang out. We're going to see some moisture. We'll tap into it, and that means we have the potential to see some heavy rain falling across this region over the next couple of days. It's not just a tomorrow problem. It's into the weekend for parts of the southern tier of the country with periods of some high rainfall. And on top of that, maybe some gusty winds. Because of that, we're going to watch for the potential for some flooding. Today, though, we'll watch for some of those stronger storms, not looking at a high risk of tornadoes by any means, but maybe some gusty winds from places like Blacksburg down to Macon and out towards Birmingham, including parts of the Carolinas as well. We'll see all of those hazards, but mainly at on the low end of that risk. Rainfall, though, that's what I think you should be really paying attention to here as the days go on, especially through the weekend. We could see 1 to 2 inches of rain across parts of the South, specifically Texas, into Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Little Rock. You'll have a good chance to see a couple of inches of rain. And on top of that, some localized spots could pick up 4 inches. So we'll be watching for the flash flood risk centered right around that area that we're expecting the most rain. Otherwise, some cooler air will start to taper into parts of the east. We'll see temperatures lower than normal. We're already going to see that today across parts of the Midwest, but that'll shift a little farther to the south and east. It'll be accompanied by a lot of sunshine, so that's the positive of that. Meanwhile, out west, if you're looking for the warm temperatures, you sure will get it. Sunny and hot for your Saturday. We'll keep it that way for Sunday. Rain sticks around for the south on Sunday, and otherwise, plenty of sunshine in our forecast, Joe.
We'll take it. I'm good with it. All right.
Good. As long as you're happy, I'm happy.
That's all that matters, right? Thanks, Angie.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.